GUI. We know it. We love it. Well, actually, we kind of hate it. And apparently, so does Unity, given that all of their UI efforts over the past decade have gone into UI Toolkit, a web-like layout and rendering system that completely forgoes the use of traditional game objects. Sounds great, and I'd love to use it, except I can't. I've tried it multiple times, and despite having been in development since well before I started using Unity, it still feels half-baked, having only recently gained extremely key features like using custom materials, which is basically a necessity for visually pleasing UI, as well as support for rendering in world space. Put simply, it's still not ready, and at this point, I'm not sure it ever will be. So, we're stuck with GUI, but is it really that bad? In my opinion, no. It's extremely simple to work with, behaving identically to any other game object in the editor. And to give credit where it's due, the rec transform might be the best built-in component in the entire engine, making every single option immediately understandable through clear inspector icons and scene view gizmos. Unlike UI Toolkit, which feels completely tacked on to the engine, a common problem with pretty much all of Unity's new features in my opinion, GUI feels designed from the ground up to be Unity's UI system. So what's actually wrong with it? If you're like me and come from a more web-oriented background, you'll already be familiar with the power of Flexbox, a layout system in CSS that makes it fast and honestly near effortless to implement pretty much any UI layout you could dream up. It is, at its core, a set of rules that intuitively align with how we tend to think about laying out pieces of information conceptually, which means there's very little thinking involved when it comes time to translate from design to screen. If you want to learn about Flexbox or just refresh your knowledge, I highly recommend checking out this blog post describing each rule alongside simple diagrams. Let's contrast this with GUI, which has no layout system at all. Instead, it has a few individual layout components, each of which are trying to emulate one or two aspects of a larger layout system. Your main workhorses here are the horizontal and vertical layout groups, acting as sort of a proxy for CSS's flex row and flex column respectively. You've got direction and spacing options, as well as controls for auto-sizing child elements. And this allows you to build fairly dynamic pieces of UI where your contents are guaranteed to fill the space you've provided in an organized manner. For the most part, this system is good enough, but there's one fatal flaw. Say you're designing character nameplates, where you have a string of text and maybe a couple icons enclosed inside a box of some kind. We want this text to have a font size of 24, so how big should this box be? Big enough to enclose the text and icons, obviously, maybe a little extra space in between, maybe a little padding. Actually, this text is too small. Let's make it a little bigger, which means we have to resize the box. And hold on, what if a player has a way longer name? Clearly, we need to figure out the size of the box's contents and any spacing before we can resize the box itself. And for this type of problem, we need a bottom-up approach. In a video describing his own layout system, Clay, which ships as a standalone library for C, developer Nick Barker describes the fundamental insight that allows Flexbox to work. That sizing must be done as a separate, bottom-up process prior to the actual positioning, which propagates top-down. I highly recommend watching his video. The actual layout math is stupidly simple, and he goes into tons of details about edge cases across the entire Flexbox spec that I won't be covering here because I didn't implement them. And this brings us to my solution, ULayout, a simple library that not only replaces the built-in horizontal and vertical layout groups, but also expands their functionality. The system is split into two parts, the layout and layout root. Each layout is responsible for itself and its immediate children, while the layout root controls the entire system, ensuring that sizing and positioning run sequentially, and that sizing is done bottom up on the hierarchy. For a quick overview of the layout component, we first have sizing options for each axis. Fit content is fairly self-explanatory. Grow will grow the element to fill its parent, while fixed allows you to size the item manually. Padding allows you to add space between the content and each edge of your container. Lastly, we've got the layout options, where I've implemented a core subset of Flexbox layout rules. Rows and columns and their reverses, along with justification and alignment for each. And an extra spacing value, which I guess is kind of in place of explicit margins for each element in CSS. This way is just more convenient. And let me just reiterate, ULayout does not implement the full Flexbox spec, mostly because I don't think it's needed. There are assets out there that set out to achieve that monumental task, but I'd argue 95% of what you can do in those is already possible just using a layout alongside Unity's other UI components. My goal was to make it as close to a drop-in replacement to the existing tools as possible. All you have to do is add a layout root component to the top of your UI hierarchy, and you're off to the races. To get text objects playing nicely, add a layout text component alongside the TextMesh Pro text, and set the vertical text alignment to capline. Layout text includes the same sizing options as the layout, allowing the element to resize in response to changes in the text contents and font size. Finally, any layout item, including layout and layout text objects, can be excluded from positioning calculations. Use absolute positioning, as they say in CSS, with the Ignore Layout toggle. The code for the project is completely open source and is available to download at the GitHub link down in the description. I've also compiled it into a Unity package file, which you can import directly into your project. If you spot any issues or want to add anything, feel free to open a pull request. I would love for this project to grow into something people feel like they can rely on. I've been toying away at various custom UI solutions on and off for almost a year at this point, and I'm happy to report that ULayout is fully up and running in Point Cloud. And it fixes basically every problem I have with UGUI, so hopefully that encourages you to give it a whirl. Anyway, that's all I've got. I hope you get some good use out of the layout, or just generally found this helpful. Like, subscribe, etc. And if you want to support me directly, consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/poke_bd. Until next time, thanks for watching.